Old Hollywood didn't just push boundaries, it dynamited them. Long before the censors took over, the pre-code era delivered films so wild, so controversial, that entire studios faced boycotts and moral outrage. What would you do if the movies you loved were banned from your local theater just for being a little too real, a little too raw? Stick around because these are the 14 pre-code films that rattled America and forced the studio bosses to sweat like never before. Babyface, 1933. Let's start with the film that made censors' heads spin, Babyface. When Warner Brothers unleashed Barbara Stanwyck as Lily Powers, they didn't just stir up gossip, they triggered a moral panic. Imagine a story about a young woman using her charm and wit to climb the corporate ladder, turning every obstacle into an opportunity, and refusing to apologize for it. In 1933, that was enough to make entire states threaten to ban the film outright. Some theaters flat out refused to screen it. What really set Babyface apart was its honesty. Lily's journey wasn't sugar-coated. She was ambitious, calculating, and shockingly independent for the time. The story was inspired by none other than Nietzsche's philosophy of self-empowerment, which the film practically shouts in your face. The original version was so frank about Lily's methods that the studio had to reshoot key scenes after censors demanded changes, but even the cleaned-up version didn't go down easily. Religious groups called it a disgrace to womanhood. Newspapers ran editorials about the moral decay infecting the silver screen. But you know what? Audiences lined up anyway. People wanted to see what all the fuss was about, and Babyface became a box office sensation, sparking boycotts and drawing angry letters from civic leaders across the country. Warner Brothers almost lost distribution deals in several states, and the controversy even helped push the infamous production code into strict enforcement. In the end, Babyface didn't just challenge the system, it helped break it, forcing Hollywood to rethink its entire approach. And Barbara Stanwyck, she became a legend, all because she dared to play a woman who refused to stay in her place. The Story of Temple Drake, 1933. If Babyface ruffled feathers, The Story of Temple Drake sent Hollywood into full-blown crisis mode. Adapted from William Faulkner's notorious novel Sanctuary, this Paramount production didn't tiptoe around scandal, it ran right through it. The story? A privileged Southern woman, Temple Drake, finds herself swept into a nightmare of crime, violence, and corruption. Audiences had never seen anything like it, and neither had the censors. The film's release was met with an immediate firestorm. Critics howled. Religious leaders demanded it be pulled from theaters. Studio executives found themselves blacklisted by community groups. Temple's descent into a criminal underworld and her attempt to reclaim her life was considered so shocking, some cities banned the film outright. In fact, The Story of Temple Drake became Exhibit A for the Clean Up Hollywood Crusaders, who argued that movies like this were poisoning American youth. Paramount tried to defend itself by arguing that the film was a cautionary tale, but the protests only grew louder. The outcry wasn't just about what happened on screen, it was about what it represented. A world where innocence could be shattered and power was up for grabs. People were genuinely frightened by the suggestion that evil wasn't always punished and virtue didn't always win. The fallout was swift. Several states banned Temple Drake for decades. Paramount felt the sting at the box office in more conservative regions and scrambled to make peace with the censors, but the damage was done. The uproar surrounding the film gave more ammunition to those calling for strict moral codes and ultimately helped bring about the end of Hollywood's wildest era. If you want to know why the pre-code era didn't last, look no further than The Story of Temple Drake. It was the scandal that even Hollywood couldn't contain, and the film that made studios realize just how much trouble a single story could cause. RedHeaded Woman, 1932. RedHeaded Woman didn't just flirt with controversy, it dove in. Lipstick first. Jean Harlow's Lil Andrews was a shock to Depression-era audiences. Here was a brash, ambitious secretary who made no secret of her determination to seduce her way up the social ladder, leaving scandalous and broken marriages in her wake. When MGM greenlit this script, based on a notorious novel, everyone in town braced for impact. The impact arrived like a brick through a window. Not only did local censorship boards demand massive cuts, but even MGM's top brass were sweating as studio boycotts popped up across the Midwest and the South. Church groups thundered from the pulpit that Red-Headed Woman was immoral filth corrupting America's daughters. Newspapers ran scathing editorials, and theaters in Boston, Pennsylvania, and beyond simply refused to show it. Jean Harlow herself became a lightning rod. Her saucy performance, snapping gum, tossing back martinis, and playing men against each other felt like a deliberate challenge to every social rule in the book. The studio tried to soften her with last-minute edits, but the boldness remained. Lil's lack of remorse for her actions infuriated critics and moral crusaders alike. The Catholic Legion of Decency ranked the film among their worst offenders, while Hollywood insiders whispered that Red-Headed Woman was the movie that would kill the party. But here's the twist. Harlow's firebrand energy turned the film into a smash hit. Women flocked to see her, some out of outrage, some out of admiration. Men couldn't stop talking about the devilish redhead. And the film's popularity, despite or because of the bans and boycotts, showed the studios just how hungry audiences were for stories that broke the mold. Red-Headed Woman didn't just cross the line, it erased it, poured itself a drink, and asked what all the fuss was about. That's pre-code Hollywood, at its gutsiest, The Sign of the Cross, 1932. Leave it to Cecil B. DeMille to spark a riot in the pews. The Sign of the Cross promised epic spectacle, gladiators, burning Rome, forbidden romance. But what really sent studio execs scrambling were the scenes DeMille refused to cut. The film reveled in decadence, with scenes of Roman orgies, Christians thrown to lions, and Claudette Colbert famously bathing in a tub of milk. Forget subtlety. This was Hollywood swinging for the scandalous fences. The Catholic Church, newly organized as a political force, wasn't having it. The National Legion of Decency called for a boycott of the entire studio, and local bishops demanded the film be pulled. Some theaters caved immediately, fearing the wrath of their congregations. Others hung on, but often only after the risque scenes were chopped out by local censors. Headlines blared warnings about dangerous paganism on the screen, and even some mainstream Protestant groups joined the protest. But DeMille knew how to sell outrage. The more churches protested, the more tickets he sold. Lines wrapped around the block, fueled by whispers about the most shocking scenes ever put to film. Newspapers gleefully reported on every scandal, every protest, turning the film into a must-see event for thrill seekers and the curious alike. The Sign of the Cross made a fortune for Paramount, but came at a price. Its legacy was stained by years of controversy. It became a case study for why the production code needed teeth. Church groups got organized, and Hollywood started to realize that anything goes had real limits, especially when faith leaders got involved. DeMille had dared the censors, and for a moment he won. But the fallout ensured that nobody would get away with it quite so brazenly again. Island of Lost Souls, 1932. If you ever wondered what it takes to get a film banned in multiple countries, Island of Lost Souls is the answer. This adaptation of H.G. Wells's The Island of Dr. Moreau was pure nightmare fuel. A mad scientist splicing animals and humans, creating a tribe of man-beasts who stumble between terror and revolt. Charles Laughton's performance as the sadistic Dr. Moreau was so convincing, so chilling, that even hardened horror fans squirmed. But it wasn't just the grotesque visuals that sparked trouble. The entire premise was considered blasphemous by religious groups, who saw Dr. Moreau's experiments as an affront to nature and God. In the American South, churches rallied for a boycott, arguing that the film's message was dangerous heresy. Movie houses in England, Ireland, and several U.S. cities banned it outright, and Paramount found itself locked in legal battles over whether Island of Lost Souls should even be allowed to screen. The film's infamous House of Pain sequence, where Moreau tortures his creations to enforce his will, became a flashpoint for protest. Newspapers ran lurid headlines. Horror too ghastly for decent audiences. Civic leaders warned of depravity unleashed. The outcry grew so fierce that some theaters replaced scheduled showings with tamer fare, and Paramount's reputation as a purveyor of the outrageous only grew. What really set the film apart, though, was its mood. A sense of lawless evil running rampant, unchecked by conscience or morality. Even in an era known for pushing boundaries, Island of Lost Souls went farther, forcing the conversation about what movies should and shouldn't show. The film remains a cult classic, a badge of honor for fans of the forbidden. But at the time, it was a cautionary tale for every studio executive. Push too far, and the whole country just might push back. 6. Scarface, 1932. If there's a single film that defined the word notorious in the pre-code era, it's Scarface. Howard Hawks and producer Howard Hughes didn't just want to make another gangster movie. They wanted to make the gangster movie. What they delivered was so relentless, so violent, and so openly critical of both crime and society that it sent censors, politicians, and even rival studios into a panic. The story of Tony Camonte, loosely modeled on Al Capone, was a cinematic gut punch from its opening gunshots to its bullet-riddled finale. The first round of trouble came from the censors themselves. The Hays office demanded more than 24 cuts, horrified by the film's brazen celebration of violence and its almost gleeful depiction of lawlessness. But Hughes, never one to back down, fought every restriction. He delayed release, ordered multiple edits, and even took out newspaper ads mocking the censors. He refused to release a watered-down version unless absolutely forced, insisting that the real problem wasn't the movie, but the world it reflected. The fallout was swift and spectacular. Cities like Chicago and New York threatened outright bans. Civic organizations staged protests outside theaters. Newspapers warned that Scarface would turn American youth into criminals. Even rival studios distanced themselves, worried that the backlash would invite stricter regulations for everyone. Some theaters faced local boycotts or refused to screen the film entirely. But here's the twist. Audiences ate it up. Despite, or maybe because of, the controversy, Scarface became a sensation. It's the classic case of forbidden fruit tastes sweetest, and Hughes reveled in the outrage. The film's violence, the infamous incestuous undertones, and its depiction of society as complicit in crime made it both a cultural flashpoint and a must-see event. Scarface didn't just break the rules, it shattered them and left the pieces for everyone else to pick up. The storm it created helped guarantee that the Hollywood Code would soon have real teeth. But even decades later, the original's wild, unrestrained energy still feels like a slap in the face. That's why Scarface is more than a film. It's a warning to every studio about what happens when you dare the world to watch. She Done Him Wrong, 1933. Mae West didn't just star in She Done Him Wrong. She turned it into her personal stage, and Hollywood never recovered. Imagine a film where the leading lady delivers double entendres with a wink, flirts with everyone in the room, and outsmarts every man who tries to control her. That's exactly what West gave audiences, and it's exactly what made studio bosses sweat. The movie was adapted from West's own scandalous play Diamond Lil, and Paramount gambled big by letting her bring that wild stage persona to the screen. The result? Outrage and fascination in equal measure. Church groups across the country called for boycotts, warning that Mae West's immorality was a bad influence. Some women's organizations even threatened to picket theaters. In Boston and Chicago, censors demanded that scenes be cut before screenings were allowed. In the South, a few theaters refused to show the film at all. But the boycotts only fueled the fire. Every protest made the movie more desirable, and every warning made audiences more curious. People flocked to theaters, hoping to catch the lines they'd been told were too racy for polite company. West's quips, like her legendary "Why don't you come up sometime and see me?" became instant cultural catchphrases. Behind the scenes, Paramount knew it was courting disaster, but couldn't resist the box office gold. She Done Him Wrong turned into a phenomenon, saving the studio from bankruptcy during the Great Depression. But it also put Hollywood on notice. Public outrage could make or break a film, and the wrong kind of attention might trigger long-term consequences. In the end, West's boldness and the studio's willingness to roll the dice rewrote the rulebook for female leads in Hollywood. She made it clear that sometimes a little outrage is exactly what the audience wants. And for everyone else, well, they could either join the boycott or enjoy the show. The Public Enemy, 1931. The Public Enemy may have started as a gritty gangster picture, but it ended up rewriting the rules of Hollywood and sparking some of the first major studio boycotts of the sound era. Released by Warner Brothers with James Cagney in his breakout role, the film follows Tom Powers as he rises through the ranks of Chicago's criminal underworld. But this wasn't just another cops and robbers flick. It was a brutally honest look at the causes and consequences of crime, with no sugarcoating and no easy moralizing. Audiences were stunned by the film's violence, but it was the psychological realism that truly unsettled critics. The infamous grapefruit scene where Cagney smashes a fruit into his girlfriend's face became an instant flashpoint. Women's organizations, church leaders, and even some politicians demanded that the film be withdrawn from theaters. Local censors in places like Chicago and Boston tried to ban or heavily edit the movie. Some exhibitors flat out refused to show it, while others faced community boycotts for daring to screen it. Warner Bros. Found itself at the center of a national debate over Hollywood's responsibility to society. The film's refusal to offer neat resolutions or to show its gangster hero receiving redemption was a direct challenge to the moral standards of the time. Newspapers ran op-eds about the dangers of glorifying criminals. Civic groups pressured other studios to avoid similar content, worried that the industry was sliding into chaos. Yet, just like many other films on this list, The Public Enemy thrived on controversy. Audiences flocked to see what all the fuss was about, and Cagney became a star overnight. The film's wild success proved that American moviegoers were hungry for grit and realism, no matter how much the moral guardians protested. Ultimately, The Public Enemy forced Hollywood to confront the limits of artistic freedom. It was a warning shot. Tell the truth at your own risk, because the whole country might just try to shut you down. Call Her Savage, 1932. Some films just want to shock, but Call Her Savage seemed intent on daring audiences to look away. Starring the indomitable Clara Bow, already famous as Hollywood's original It Girl, this Fox film played like a fever dream of taboos. The plot follows NASA Springer, a rebellious socialite whose wild behavior pushes her from one scandal to the next. And scandal is putting it lightly. The movie leaps from barroom brawls to saloon catfights to marital betrayals without stopping to catch its breath. But what really lit a fire under studio bosses and censors was the film's frank depictions of everything the production code would soon make impossible. NASA's exploits included risque relationships, turbulent family secrets, and scenes of raw, unchecked emotion rarely seen on screen. The film didn't just push boundaries, it gleefully trampled them. Social and religious groups erupted in protest, denouncing Fox and demanding local bans. Some theaters in the Midwest and South refused to show it. Others that did were boycotted by family groups and church organizations. The backlash didn't stop there. Newspaper critics warned that Call Her Savage glamorized immorality and would undermine public decency. Moral watchdogs said it was the last straw, evidence that Hollywood studios could not police themselves. For Clara Bow, it was a final, unforgettable blast of notoriety before her career faded with the advent of stricter censorship. Still, the very uproar Call Her Savage caused proved irresistible to many. Audiences, lured by whispers of scenes too daring for words, packed theaters in urban centers. Bow's electric performance and the movie's high-voltage storytelling earned it a notorious spot in pre-code legend. For Fox, it was both a hit and a headache, one that helped fuel the push for industry-wide reform. It stands as a warning and a dare. Sometimes you can go too far, but audiences just can't look away. The Bitter Tea of General Yen, 1933. Few films of the early 1930s dared to touch interracial romance, but The Bitter Tea of General Yen, directed by Frank Capra, no less, waded directly into those forbidden waters. Barbara Stanwyck stars as Megan, a missionary in war-torn China who finds herself falling under the spell of General Yen, played by Swedish actor Niels Astor in Asian makeup. The film's themes of cultural collision, forbidden love, and political turmoil were always going to spark controversy, but no one at Columbia Pictures expected the powder keg that followed. Almost immediately, religious groups and conservative organizations across the country called for boycotts, horrified at what they called dangerous moral relativism. Some theaters refused to show the film, and several major studio chains banned it entirely in certain cities. Southern states in particular reacted with outrage, seeing the mere suggestion of a romance between a white woman and a Chinese man as beyond the pale. Newspaper editors fanned the flames, with headlines questioning Hollywood's sense of responsibility and accusing Capra of deliberate provocation. But Capra and Stanwyck didn't shy away from the fire. They doubled down on the story's emotional complexity. refusing to apologize for the film's boldness. For Capra, this was a story about human connection, defying prejudice and war, a message that was decades ahead of its time. The irony? The very boycotts meant to kill the movie only stoked interest in the cities where it did play. Urban crowds, always hungry for a cinematic event, came in droves. Critics praised the film's artistry and courage, even as the backlash intensified elsewhere. In the end, The Bitter Tea of General Yen became a touchstone in Hollywood's ongoing struggle with censorship and race. It's proof that, in the pre-code era, even the boldest films paid a price for breaking new ground. But sometimes, that price was exactly what made them unforgettable. Search for Beauty, 1934. Sometimes, Hollywood didn't just court controversy, it practically put out a casting call for it. Case in point, Search for Beauty. This Paramount production was practically a how-to guide for getting yourself boycotted in the 1930s. On its surface, the movie is about a pair of Olympic athletes recruited to run a health and fitness magazine. But don't be fooled, this is pure pre-code mischief dressed in gym shorts. The real story is how Search for Beauty gleefully loaded its cast with dozens of scantily clad young men and women, holding body beautiful contests both in the movie and in a wildly publicized nationwide promotion. Paramount held actual screen tests in American cities, encouraging locals to show off their physiques for a shot at movie stardom, scandalizing parents, pastors, and prudes from coast to coast. The movie's plot was just an excuse for endless scenes of half-dressed athletes parading for the camera. As you can guess, this approach did not go over quietly. Church groups, women's clubs, and decency leagues were incensed, with some cities slapping outright bans on the film. The Catholic Legion of Decency blacklisted it, calling the movie indecent and degrading. Studio bosses faced boycott threats from exhibitors who worried about alienating family audiences. But the studio leaned into the uproar. Ad campaigns promised the most beautiful bodies ever filmed, and word of mouth did the rest. Young audiences especially flocked to see what all the scandal was about, making Search for Beauty a financial win for Paramount, but also a cautionary tale. The film's legacy? It became one of the last great pre-code romps before Hollywood locked itself down with stricter censorship. If you want to know how to make everyone mad and fill your theater in the process, Search for Beauty was the playbook. Murders in the Rue Morg, 1932. When Universal set out to adapt Edgar Allan Poe's Murders in the Rue Morg, they weren't aiming for just another monster movie. They wanted something that would shock audiences, and they got exactly that. Starring the incomparable Bela Lugosi as the deranged doctor. Miracle. The film delivered a blend of horror, science fiction, and outright grotesquerie that had never hit the American screen with such force. The plot revolves around Doctor Miracle's gruesome experiments, kidnapping women and injecting them with ape blood in a quest for the missing link. Even in the wild and woolly pre-code era, this was a lot. Audiences expecting a moody mystery were confronted with graphic scenes of abduction, torture, and off-screen horrors that censors quickly flagged as too lurid for public decency. Some cities, especially in the South and Midwest, demanded heavy edits or refused to show the film at all, sparking boycotts by family groups and religious leaders. The outcry wasn't just about the violence. Critics and church officials alike worried about the film's implications. The blurring of man and beast, the explicit references to evolutionary theory, and the sheer terror that Lugosi's performance brought to the screen. Newspaper editorials warned parents to keep children away, and the film was even banned outright in the United Kingdom for decades. Yet, as always, controversy sold tickets. Horror fans flocked to see if the rumors were true, and Murders in the Rue Morg became a cult sensation, at least where it could be seen. For Universal, it was proof that boundary-pushing cinema could make headlines, even if it got them in hot water with the moral watchdogs. Employees' Entrance 1933. If you think ruthless corporate culture is a modern invention, you haven't seen Employees' Entrance. Warner Brothers unleashed this razor-sharp drama at the height of the Depression, with Warren Williams starring as Kurt Anderson, a cold-blooded department store manager who'll stop at nothing to increase profits, trample competitors, and dominate his staff. The film's take-no-prisoners attitude was shocking enough, but what really triggered boycotts was Anderson's predatory behavior toward female employees. His actions were depicted not as isolated villainy, but as part of the ugly reality of business, a radical idea for its time. Church groups, social activists, and women's organizations condemned the film as an attack on American decency, warning that it glorified immorality and workplace abuse. Major theater chains in conservative cities responded by pulling the film or facing boycotts from community groups. The studio tried to defend employees' entrance as a cautionary tale, but its blunt honesty and refusal to punish the villain in typical Hollywood fashion only fueled the outrage. Newspaper reviews called it harsh, cynical, and dangerous. Some regions wouldn't even screen it unless Warner Brothers edited out key scenes that, ironically, made the movie so riveting in the first place. Despite or because of the protests, the film drew strong urban audiences and earned a place as one of the gutsiest social dramas of the era. It's now seen as a direct ancestor to later hard-edged workplace films, but in 1933, it was a lightning rod for outrage and a prime example of why the censors were sharpening their scissors. 3 on a Match 1932. Sometimes the wildest films don't announce themselves, they sneak up and explode. 3 on a Match is a perfect example. Released by Warner Brothers, this crime melodrama followed 3 women from childhood into adulthood, charting their fortunes and fates through a web of marriage, addiction, and gangster intrigue. The film's brisk pace and rapid-fire editing masked a core that was, for the time, utterly incendiary. What made it so shocking? For starters, the film tackled topics the code would soon all but erase from Hollywood: drug addiction, extramarital affairs, and child endangerment. One character's descent into addiction and eventual suicide was portrayed with a level of frankness that left censors reeling. Women's clubs and family associations didn't just ask for cuts, they called for outright boycotts, accusing Warner Brothers of destroying American values. Some states banned the film entirely, while others required substantial edits before it could be shown. And yet, like so many pre-code classics, the movie's willingness to go there made it unforgettable. Critics, once the initial shock wore off, praised the film's daring and realism. Joan Blondell, Anne Dvorak, and Bette Davis all delivered performances that still hold up as some of the best of the era. The boycotts only fueled curiosity, packing theaters in less conservative cities and cementing 3 on a Match as a hidden gem for audiences hungry for something real. In the end, 3 on a Match didn't just get people talking, it got the industry thinking. Sometimes, breaking every rule is the only way to show just how necessary those rules were in the first place. So, after all those boycotts, protests, and headlines, you have to ask, was it worth it? These films didn't just rattle Hollywood, they reshaped it, proving that audiences would risk scandal for a story that felt alive. Which of these pre-code shockers would you dare to watch first? Drop your pick, or your own forbidden favorite, in the comments. Hit like, subscribe, and share if you love wild Hollywood history, and remember, the movies always find a way to break free.